Dear mentors, in this video we'll explore fraction multiplication, and we'll do it in such a way that you can explain this topic to your students in a conceptual way. Remember how in other videos we've talked about conceptual understanding and procedural understanding? What we want to do is actually to teach them both. And what we want to do is actually that they help each other, they nurture each other. So we are promoting both ways. In this video, however, we'll focus more on the conceptual understanding. So let's go ahead and start with an example. And so we'll consider the following fraction multiplication. Let's do 1/2 times 1/3. And so, of course, if you do this with procedural understanding, you know that you can multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. Those are two processes, and then just build that new fraction. But let's do it in a visual way. So let's do something that we would call the area method, in which we represent the unit as a square or as a rectangle. Doesn't matter. And so this is our unit. And what we want to do now is to make sense of fraction multiplication as some operation that I'm doing to another quantity. So what I can think of it now is 1/2 times 1/3, either 1/2 of a third or 1/3 of a half. So I have two ways to think of this. 1/2 times 1/3, depending on how I want to see it. 1/2 of 1/3, and I'm explicitly switching between words and symbols so that the message is a little more clear. Because when I say 1/2 in words, what I mean is I'm doing some operation. I'm cutting into halves. On the other hand, I could do 1/3 of 1/2. And this is important when you explain. Try to use a lot of words, even like keywords of concepts, and write them down. In other words, at the end of your explanation, when the students are gone, and when you look at the whiteboard or the paper, wherever you did math, you don't want to see just numbers and formulas. You want to see some words, you want to see some questions, etc., etc. So this should be reflecting how was the mathematical quality of your explanation. And if it only reflects numbers, it may lead, or it may give the sensation that you just did procedures. And it's good to balance them, as we've talked in other videos. So let's take first this way, 1/2 of 1/3. And so what we want to do is, before we take 1/2, we want to build 1/3. So how to build 1/3? I can break this unit into 3 parts of same size. And so this is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And so remember, same size, because that's how fractions work. That's the key rule about fractions, that you're breaking into the same size. And I want to pick 1/3, so I want to really pick this. And that's my new area that I'm concentrating. And I want to cut this into half. So I want to cut this in 2, and let's do that. So the most natural way, but maybe not the only way, is to cut it like this. Of course, you could have cut in a vertical cut, and that would be the same. And then you want to ask the student the question, if I take half of this, namely this region here, what's the size of that piece? And so another question would be, how many pieces of that size are needed to build the unit? Because that's how you get, you answer fractions, right? You kind of reconstructing your total or your unit to determine the size of the fraction. And it should be clear that this is 1/6, because 6 of them make the unit. Let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you could complete these lines here. And so the answer should be 1/6. Let's consider another example. And so you could do this as a homework problem, say 1/3 of 1/2. So you can do this after. But let's consider another example. Dealing with slightly more complicated quantities, but using the same idea. So let's do 2/3 multiplied by 1/4. So how can we do that? And so again, I could use either the dot notation or the x notation or times notation for multiplication. But it's important that the students know which are you using. I'm just changing this symbol to illustrate that there's different ways. But of course, probably during a lesson or during a Math.co meeting, you should stick to just one way. So let's do this, and I'll pick the following representation, which might be easier. 1/4. So 1/4 of 2/3. And so let's go for it. We start with our unit. And that's a big misconception in fractions, that some students don't really recognize the fact that you have to be clear on the unit. And that leads to, wrong comparisons when you're multiplying or adding fractions. So you always have to be clear on what's your unit. And you can be very flexible. You could start with any shape you want and call it your unit. When you reason fractions like abstractly, like we're doing here, it doesn't really matter. But you have to be consistent and pick a unit from the beginning. So this is my unit. I'm going to build 2/3. So break into 3 parts of equal size. So that's the key concept. And pick 2 of them. And now I have to take 1/4 of that. So again, you could divide using vertical or horizontal lines. But so you want to start convincing the kid, and this is conditioning, but it's fine. That's how math works in some aspects. You just condition, you just repeat some routines, and your students just model them. They should be good routines, of course, good habits. And so what we're going to do is, instead of doing vertical, we're going to do horizontal. Again, we have to take 1/4, so we first take half, and each half we break it into 2 again. Notice how I'm doing the lines like fully, because I know it's going to be useful later. And so what I want to do is I want to pick out of these 4 pieces, just one of them. So I'm going to select just this piece here. And that's my 1/4. Let's check. I had 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm taking 1/4 of it. And so now the student can see that actually what we did is the following. So the question is, how much is that, right? And so he can see that in total there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's a total of 12 new pieces. And we are picking 2 of these new pieces. And why 2? Well, we picked this bar, but if we break this bar into 2, well, now it's 2 mini bars or 2 new pieces. So the answer to this question should be 2 pieces of 1/12 each. And so that's the same as 2/12. And we can simplify 2/12, and that's 1/6. So if we can check with the procedure, so let's do a check here. 2/3 times 1/4, and we just multiply the top numbers. So 2 times 1 is 2, and 3 times 4, the bottom numbers, is 12, which gives us 1/6. So that's good. That's the answer to our problem. And so I hope in this video you learn how you can use visuals to explain fraction multiplication and make sense of that. Remember that you're not just teaching for today when you teach, but you're actually teaching long term. You're teaching habits of mind, connections between other topics, and here what you're really enhancing is spatial reasoning. So that's another thing why this is very important. Thank you.